On the 13th of November 1974, PLO chief Yasser Arafat walked in the UN Assembly Hall carrying an olive branch and an empty holster. In his address to the assembly, he declared that belligerents in Palestine faced a choice between further war and peace. The implication was clear. Palestine would continue to fight for freedom but longed for peace and would embrace it as soon as the dream of self-determination became a reality for the Palestinians. Israel's response and policy were crystal clear as always. An Israeli prime minister and a former terrorist leader of the notorious Stern gang, Yitzhak Shamir, minced no words as he said, "We shall not give the Arabs 1 inch of our land, even if we have to negotiate for 10 years. We won't give them a thing. We have the veto in our hands." I am Dr. Hassan Bukhari, and this is the 24th episode of our series, Palestine versus Israel. In this episode, we will discuss the first Intifada and the Oslo peace process. Both these events elucidate the trends in Israel and Palestine which are hinted at from the statements of Arafat and Shamir quoted above. On the 8th of December 1987, an Israeli tank transport truck crushed 4 Palestinians to death and injured several others. The funerals of the victims transformed into massive demonstrations, which in turn turned into Palestinian resistance movement known as the Intifada. The incident that sparked the Intifada was just like the killing of Archduke Ferdinand that sparked the First World War. In both cases, an incident served as merely a match that lighted the huge amount of explosives that had been getting accumulated for decades. Israel had defeated the Arabs in 3 wars and thwarted them in the 4th. Then, Israel and US had managed to isolate Egypt from the movement for Palestine's liberation, a step that ensured that Arab states would play no further significant role in the Palestinian struggle. 3 years after Anwar Sadat's betrayal, Israel had managed to smash the PLO in Lebanon. Feeling secure in its occupation of Palestine, the number of Israeli settlers moving to the West Bank and Gaza multiplied by 8 from 1978 to 1987 as compared to the preceding decade. But the Palestinian anger at the Israeli robbery simmered on. From 1985 onwards, Arab demonstrations against Israeli occupation and settlements started gaining traction. Israeli authorities responded with brutality, which only further fueled Arab anger. The Intifada, which began in 1987, was undirected by any higher organization, including Arafat's PLO leadership that had located to Tunisia after the carnage in Lebanon. According to Charles Smith, at its heart, the Intifada was a rebellion of the poor and the young, the less advantaged sectors of the population, who organized popular committees that PLO representatives then sought to co-opt under their own direction. The movement was led on the ground by local leaders who had emerged from the movement itself in the wake of its spontaneous outbreak. They loosely organized themselves to form the Unified National Leadership, or the UNL. The demonstrations were completely non-violent. Knives and guns were banned. The protest leaders wanted to engage world opinion, and hence they thought that the image of unarmed Palestinians confronting the Israeli troops who shot to kill would garner a lot of attention. The Palestinian demand, issued in January 1988, was simple: an independent Palestinian state governed by the PLO that would coexist with Israel. The indication that Palestine was even ready to accept only 1/4 of its historic land and accept the state of Israel on the remaining 3/4 was a massive concession, one that hadn't been made publicly by Arafat yet. But the Israeli response to this olive branch was characteristically violent. Robert Hunter, quoted an Israeli defense lawyer who was trying to defend Palestinian protesters in his book Palestinian Uprising. If you are arrested, the general rule is after you confess, you can see a lawyer. Everyone is beaten when they are arrested or to get a confession out of them. You must be very tough not to break in these circumstances. In the first 5 weeks of the Intifada, dozens of Palestinians were killed and wounded. Around 2,000 were imprisoned as well, despite zero casualties for Israelis. Israeli brutality in response to non-violent protests did invite some significant international criticism, probably for the first time in the Israeli history. Notwithstanding the Israeli tyranny, the UNL continued functioning effectively and organized robust strikes and protests. According to Professor Charles Smith, the UNL sponsored strikes and shutdowns of businesses survived Israeli attempts to break them. Israeli counter-tactics, principally the denial of food supplies to the villages, full quarantines, and the like, were countered by the spread of family gardens that became a symbol of resistance. Israeli authorities at times arrested Arabs for growing their own food, as happened in the Christian village of Beth Sahur. Nevertheless, the brutality took its toll, and gradually the character of the Intifada began to change. By the end of 1989, 626 Palestinians had been killed, 37,000 had been wounded, and almost an equal number had been arrested. But 43 Israelis had also been killed, as some Palestinians finally started resorting to violence. Israel's global sponsor, the USA, took this minuscule Palestinian violence as a godsend and started a campaign to defend Israeli barbarity as a just response to Palestinian attacks. The US persisted in this track despite the fact that 10 times more Palestinians were killed in the first Intifada than Israelis, not to mention the arrests, beatings, and economic losses for Palestinians. This shameful US behavior created much anti-US feeling among Palestinians. Arafat established close relations with Saddam Hussein of Iraq as a result of this anti-US feeling. This proximity to Saddam damaged Arafat's relations with the Arab Gulf kingdoms greatly when Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990. The first Intifada produced some interesting and seemingly unpredictable outcomes. As the Intifada progressed, the secular nature of the Palestinian resistance started transforming and developing an Islamic flavor. In February 1988, an organization named Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic resistance movement, now well known as Hamas, was founded. According to Smith, the formation of Hamas was a direct outgrowth of the Intifada. Its founders were Muslim brothers, such as Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, who decided to extend the Brotherhood's ideology into politics. Initially, Hamas was clandestinely backed by Israel to buttress it as a counterweight to the PLO or Fatah. As the saying goes, tyrants create their own worst enemies. Thus was so for Israelis here. From 1990 onwards, Palestinian militancy became dominated by Islamists. In the same year, Hamas created its military wing and named it Izzaduddin al-Qassam Brigade in honor of the eponymous Palestinian hero who had been killed fighting the British imperialists in 1935. Another important effect of the first Intifada was to convince even some hardline Israelis that some form of negotiation with the Palestinians was necessary. Even Yitzhak Rabin, who as defense minister had let loose a reign of terror upon the Palestinians during the first half of the Intifada, became convinced that a political solution was necessary. Rabin became the Prime Minister of Israel in 1992. One of the stated aims of his election campaign was the achievement of some form of peaceful solution to the Palestine problem. By this time, Arafat was desperate for a deal with Israel as well. He was isolated and abandoned by his Arab and Russian allies. Howard Sacker writes, "The recent collapse of the Soviet Empire and the unavailability of any further Russian diplomatic or military support had also to be considered. So too did the PLO's grievously marred image among other Arab governments after its fulsome support of Saddam Hussein in the recent Gulf War." So, Palestinian and Israeli diplomats held several rounds of talks under American aegis, but these talks remained deadlocked. Separate from these official talks, an unofficial diplomatic channel was opened in Oslo by Rabin's foreign minister Shimon Peres. The talks in Oslo progressed more successfully than the official talks in Washington, and both parties conferred official status on the Oslo talks soon. Finally, in August 1993, an accord was concluded. According to Charles Smith, there were two aspects to what can be termed the Israeli-Palestinian Accord: the Declaration of Principles and the Letters of Mutual Recognition. The DOP was initialed in Oslo on August 20, 1993, but the official signing occurred at the White House on September 13. The DOP was conditional on the exchange of letters of recognition by Yasser Arafat as chairman of the PLO and Yitzhak Rabin as Prime Minister of Israel. Although depicted as mutual, the types of recognition given were unequal because of the disparity in status of the signatories, one a state, the other an organization. No reference to a Palestinian state was permitted by the Israelis in the Oslo Accord document. According to Sacker, less than a comprehensive treaty, the document in effect was an agreement to reach agreement, leaving the details to be negotiated between the parties. Smith writes, "Nothing denoting Palestinian sovereignty or unilateral authority independent of Israeli supervision had been ceded by Israel. Most matters were still subject to negotiations where there was wide latitude for disagreement." Whereas Palestinian scholar Dr. Rashid Khalidi, who was part of the Washington talks but not the Oslo talks, has astutely observed that Israel had not recognized a Palestinian state or even made a commitment to allow the creation of one. This was a peculiar transaction whereby a national liberation movement had obtained nominal recognition from its oppressors without achieving liberation, by trading its own recognition of the state that had colonized its homeland and continued to occupy it. This was a resounding, historic mistake, one with grave consequences for the Palestinian people. Basically, what Khalidi rightly observed was that Oslo Accords lacked reciprocity. It was a proverbially unequal treaty, and as the students of Chinese history know full well, unequal treaties are never kept. They are just used by the dominant side to impose its will and disregard its obligations under such treaties with impunity, while maintaining the facade and fiction of law and peace. The 1993 Declaration of Principles document stipulated that an interim agreement will soon be concluded that will form the basis of the creation of a Palestinian self-governing authority, not a state. This interim agreement was signed with the name of Oslo II Accord by Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestinian Authority Chairman Yasser Arafat on September 24, 1995. It was a peculiar agreement which created islands under Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Gaza, surrounded by Israelis who were also given unfettered control of all the borders. Even within most of the so-called Palestinian areas, Israel retained considerable authority. Charles Smith has briefly but succinctly explained Oslo II in his book Palestine and the Arab-Israeli Conflict. Oslo II called for the West Bank to be divided into three areas labeled A, B, and C. Israeli forces would withdraw from specified areas in Area A and B prior to the election of the Palestinian Authority in late January 1996. Area A identified 6 population centers in the West Bank: Jenin, Nablus, Tulkaram, Kalkalia, Ramallah, and Bethlehem. In addition, special arrangements were made for an Israeli redeployment in Hebron, creating a Palestinian self-governing area but preserving a Jewish sector. The Hebron redeployment would not occur until January 1997. Area B comprised about 450 smaller towns and rural hamlets, often but not always adjacent to the larger towns in Area A. It was anticipated that regions within Area B could be shifted to Area A in the future, just as lands from Area C would come under Area B. As for Area C, Israeli withdrawal would supposedly occur in 3 stages within 18 months of the election of the council in January 1996. But in contrast to Areas A and B, the areas and timing were deliberately left vague. In Area A, the Palestinians would have full responsibility for overall security as well as internal affairs. In Area B, the rural areas, the Palestinian Authority, through its elected council, would oversee public order and internal security in matters involving Palestinians. However, unlike in Area A, in Area B, Israel would be responsible for external security and have final authority for security matters generally. But it was Area C and its link to issues to be decided only in the permanent status talks that suggested how misleading certain clauses of the accord could be. Arafat claimed that Oslo II guaranteed the return of 80% of the West Bank to the Arabs, while Rabin assured the Knesset that the pact left 70% of the same land, or all of Area C, in Israel's hands. Jerusalem, settlements, borders, refugees, security arrangements, and the like, all Israeli settlements, military installations, and border areas were in Area C. Oslo II also provided for the expansion of the network of bypass roads from Israel proper to all settlements, linking them to each other and to pre-1967 Israel. These roads were intended, in Rabin's words, to enable Israelis to move without crossing the Palestinian population areas that will become the Palestinian Authority's responsibility. Rabin did not note that the roads would also cut off Palestinian areas from each other, denying contiguity and blocking an effective imposition of any central Palestinian authority independent of Israeli security. Finally, Israel interpreted the agreement to permit it to decide unilaterally which, if any, parts of Area C would be ceded should that become necessary. The United States would agree with that interpretation in 1997. Here, one might ask, why didn't Arafat just walk away instead of signing this unequal treaty? Charles Smith was not wrong when he wrote, "What mattered most to Arafat and to the United States, which claimed credit for the achievement, was the appearance of progress, not the specifics of implementation and their implications. What mattered most to the Rabin government was the granting of Palestinian Authority over nearly 90% of the West Bank's Arab population, while ceding only 30% of the land." In his desperation for an agreement, the experienced Yasser Arafat made a cardinal mistake and fell a prey to wishful thinking. He mistakenly began believing that Israelis would honor their obligations under this unequal treaty. He foolishly believed as well that the USA would jump in and enforce the treaty negotiated under its good offices if the Israelis reneged on it. There is no doubt that, contrary to Arafat, Rabin didn't make a mistake in signing the Oslo Accords. Israel retained its death grip on Palestine while creating an illusion with the name of the Palestinian Authority to placate global opinion. But what did Rabin get in return for his labors from his people? A bullet to the chest that killed him. Many in Israel labeled Rabin a traitor to the Zionist cause. Ariel Sharon and Benjamin Netanyahu, who was to become the longest-serving Prime Minister of Israel, endorsed the labeling of Rabin as a Nazi and a traitor who deserved to be killed. Finally, on the 4th of November 1995, merely 6 weeks after the signing of Oslo II Accords, a young Jew named Yigal Amir did Netanyahu's dirty work and shot Rabin to death. Now, I will briefly discuss the effects of the Oslo Accords. While negotiating the Accords, the Israelis were much concerned with security coordination. Rabin wanted Arafat to control dissidents and ensure that no attacks targeting Israelis originated from the regions under the Palestinian Authority. Interestingly, Rabin refused to halt the expansion of settlements or to rein in settler violence. He was totally unconcerned about the fact that in trying to control the Palestinians from responding to the settlers' outrages, Arafat and the PA would lose all legitimacy in Palestinian eyes. Or maybe that's what he wanted. Arafat took the responsibility for this security coordination after Oslo II, and as a result, the Palestinian Authority police, trained and armed with light arms by the USA, became Israel's enforcer in the territories under the PA. Another important factor to be noted here is the friction that soon arose between local Palestinians and the officials of the PA that came with Arafat from Tunisia. According to Charles Smith, Palestinians from the territories called their counterparts from outside the Tunisians, referring to the decade in which the PLO had had its residence in Tunisia following its ouster from Lebanon. Their wealth and their lifestyles, including the way their wives dressed, were considered too European and immodest by many local Muslims. Soon, a large chunk of the Palestinian population began to look at the Tunisians as aliens and the B team of the Israeli occupation operators. The PA police cemented this perception by using repression and torture like the Israelis against the people. Riots broke out in Gaza in July 1997 when 14 Palestinians were killed in the custody of the PA's police. The 14th death which triggered the riots was that of a young man who had dared to question the dress code of an officer's wife and had gotten himself arrested by the Tunisian woman's husband for this crime. From 1993 to 2000, the Israeli settlements in the occupied territories also doubled, and the bypass road network, off limits to Arabs, transformed the Arab areas into dozens of isolated ghettos. The Oslo process finally met its demise in July 2000 when a summit organized by US President Clinton at Camp David between Yasser Arafat and then Israeli PM Ehud Barak failed. Barak had used an interesting tactic during the negotiations at Camp David. He had communicated his offers to President Clinton and asked him to report these offers to Arafat as US ideas. Barak wanted Clinton to gain Arafat's assent for these offers before getting convinced by Clinton to agree to them. Of course, had Arafat accepted these offers, it's likely that Barak would then have reneged on many essential elements of these offers. But Arafat, now all the wiser after the Oslo debacle, saw through the ruse and refused to be deceived again. Arafat's refusal was hailed by the Palestinians, but it also put an end to the so-called peace process between Palestine and Israel. Ehud Barak spun the failure at Camp David as a product of Arafat's rigidity and blamed the Arabs for wrecking the peace process. He declared, "The Palestinians have for a generation held international legitimacy. We succeeded in a year to turn that around without giving up anything. The world is with us and the onus is now on the other side." It is a vivid testimony to the West's hypocrisy that the Western media and polities gladly ate up whatever crap Barak and Israel fed them about the failure at Camp David. In the end, I will just narrate Rashid Khalidi's sagacious appraisal of the Oslo process as the final word on this episode. I am convinced that rejecting Israel's bare bones offers in Washington and Oslo would have been the right course. Had the PLO taken such a tough stance, the outcome would not have been worse than the loss of land, resources, and freedom of movement suffered by the Palestinians since 1993. On balance, a failure to reach a deal would have been better than the deal that emerged from Oslo. Occupation would have continued, as it has anyway, but without the veil of Palestinian self-government, without relieving Israel of the financial burden of governing and administering a population of millions, and without security coordination, the worst outcome of Oslo, whereby the PA helps Israel police control the restive Palestinians living under its military regime as their lands are gradually appropriated by Israeli colonizers. In the next episode of Palestine versus Israel, we will discuss the second Intifada and the horrible conflict in Gaza that is going on even today. Stay tuned, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.